Stefan Goldsberg will present on François-Xavier Licari's droit talmudique.
Okay. I'll be very short. Okay. So, thank you. So the book is called Le droit talmudique, which is one of the possible translations of Jewish law. And unfortunately, the author could not make it today, and he told me to tell you how sorry he was. So if I raise any questions, I suppose I will answer them, which is not such a problem because I myself schizophrenic. No, I'm not. Okay. I think it's a great book. And I try to explain why in a nutshell. It's not obviously a book about halacha lema'aseh, okay? And it's not either abstract sort of Oxford legal theory, completely disconnected from any type of reality. I would describe it as a meta-halachic presentation of Jewish law. So the author is a comparative scholar, and he has worked on German law, American law, and obviously French law. So his approach is very original. I've never seen such an approach in Jewish studies, at least for sure in French. Let me just tell you the titles of the chapters, and you will see that each of the names of the titles could be a theme of the Jewish Law Association. So the first chapter is about Talmud as an object of study, meaning as an object of academic study. It tries to show that, and that's one of his purposes, that the Talmud, or Jewish law in general, should be accounted for in general studies. In French law degree, you should have at least one or a few hours, at least one course about Jewish law. Second chapter is Jewish law as a religious legal order, and he avoids theoretical questions that would have no relevance on nafka-mina or what have you. The third chapter is very interesting. It's about the sources of the law, and Licari works in Nancy, lectures in Nancy. And Nancy is the place where a very important French lawyer lived, and his name is François-Xavier. You may have heard of him. He's the author par excellence. I like to say par excellence with an English accent. He's the author par excellence about the sources of law. And this really is a key notion, I think, in Jewish law. This is quite obvious. Fourth chapter is devoted to the very notion of authority. The fifth one is about hermeneutics, and he goes through the Shloshes Hemidot, and he illustrates them very clearly. Well, I must say that I read the book and I reacted on it before it was out of press. So if you happen to like it, I will take some credit, and if you dislike it, well, I'm only one of the readers. And the last chapter is about legal pluralism within Jewish law, and Jewish law as it is intertwined with other legal cultures, etc. There is a very handy glossary, and now I would like to raise one point. Not really a criticism, but the book, I would say, proposes a very, how to put it, he adopts a very interesting distance, okay? If he looked at Jewish law from further away, it would not be fleshed out sufficiently, and if he didn't have that distance, it would be things that are already available. I would say that his presentation is rather top-down. Not that I think that halacha is top-down, but his presentation I would say, mentions rather than scrutinizes sugyot. Okay, he doesn't really enter into the sugyot, but this is because of the format of this series. I must say something. There is, I'm sorry to say that, but there is no single interesting footnote in that book. And one of the reasons is because the editor forbids any footnote. And I myself wrote a book in that series, and I tried to put one, and he erased it. But some of you are quoted in each chapter. Okay? I would say most of you, but so whatever should have been in the footnotes is at the end of each chapter. So really doesn't really matter. The fact that there is no footnote and therefore no good footnote is not such. It's not a problem. And I would say that the book is interesting not so much, not only because of the questions that he decided to raise, but also, and now I speak in the French-speaking context, also because of all those questions that he managed not to raise. Okay, you must imagine how it is in French-speaking culture. People still, and I know some of the English speakers also do that, but people still in legal philosophy, for example, wonder what is the definition of a rule. And what is the distinction between law and ethics, and is Indian culture legal or sub-legal, and then they use heart, etc. It's really, legal philosophy in French is not very interesting. And I'm very happy that he managed not to pick those fashionable questions. And the reason is central, is inherent to Jewish law. The reason why he doesn't address theoretical question is because there is no nafkamina. So he manages to avoid many pitfalls, many questions that I think are not relevant. And for your information, he's preparing a book on legal realism, meaning American legal realism. And the fact that he studies that sort of literature helps understand why he took those decisions. And I think, again, it's a great book. And if you have a few weeks or month free, then please learn French and give it a read. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our final presenter is Chaim Semen, who will present on Shai Vosner's book, Legal Thinking in the Lithuanian Yeshivot, The Heritage and Works of Rabbi Shimon Shkar.
Well, I'm sure there's a measure somewhere that says the head can't absorb what the tuchus can't sit through. So it's not a should be. So I will try to be brief. So it's a real honor to present the work of our host, Shai Vosner. This book is important because it offers us an intellectual portrait of Reb Shimon Shkar, one of the leaders and pillars of the Lithuanian yeshiva world, a world that to some degree anyone who learns Talmud and Halacha still inhabits. It joins a small but growing body of work on Achronim, which I think is very important, and generally, until recent years, has been under development, under thought. But it's really important because it's a different type of biography. Probably in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was a type of biography of a rabbinic scholar produced by typically, sorry to the Jewish history people in the room, by a Jewish historian. That was very long on the social political history of the figure that it was talking about, and very short on understanding anything about their halachic method. This is because these scholars were historians, sometimes not halachists, and never legal theorists. So one really important thing about this book is that it's written by a top-flight legal thinker, someone invested in legal theory, and in law generally, and of course by a top-flight Talmud Chacham. And in that case, it focuses rightly on Reb Shimon Shkar's halachic insights and method, and which I think is what is actually interesting about him. So this becomes obvious when we look at the book's final three chapters, where Shai deals with Reb Shimon Shkar's views on ontological and naturalistic conceptions of law, Reb Shimon's understanding of the halachic category of Isser, and of prohibition, and as it relates to both things in the what we would call the legal realm, in other words, the civil law and the religious law, and finally, probably Reb Shimon Shkar's most famous distinction between what he calls Torah lemishpatim, roughly civil law, and mitzvot Hashem, God's commandments. In each case, Shai combines a deep understanding of Reb Shimon's work, the broader halachic literature, and a keen sense of how to translate the often impenetrable language of the Achronim into the categories of Western thought. The result is rich, deep, and rewarding. Now, a lot of Reb Shimon's work, and therefore Shai's, is engaged in this question of how to understand a system that is constantly mixing the things that we call law, civil law, and what it does, and therefore parallels the work of other legal systems, with the unique terminology and ontology of a system designed to perfect man's standing with God. Now, depending on how we phrase these questions, they're both classically talmudic, but also undeniably modern, really touching on core questions in church-state law, and maybe in legal theory and epistemology more generally. Now, the trouble with Talmudic writing, and Achronic writing in particular, is that it's insular, impenetrable, and it's designed to obscure rather than showcase its novel insights. So for the commentary tailor the theorist, the challenge is as follows. On the one hand, to notice when the elliptical language of the Achronim is talking about a question of legal theory, but on the other hand, not to overshoot it and to oversee that the Achron is working with the categories of law that we expect or are used to find. And this is really where the book shines. In the chapter on Mishpatim, Shai takes, again, Reb Shimon's most famous contribution to legal theory, this idea of this distinct, that there's a sort of zone of Mishpatim that is different from mitzvot Hashem, and analyzes it. Now here, he takes to task, rightfully, a rather facile explanation of this that other scholars, well-regarded scholars of Jewish thought and Jewish studies have found, and assume that Reb Shimon here is talking about a kind of, maybe tie up all the books here, a sort of Jewish natural law, or halachic natural law that stands sort of a prior as a foundation to the halacha. And Shai kind of explains why people might think this and cites all sorts of scholars who do this. But I think rightfully, and I think it's because, to go back to the beginning, because he has a grounding in legal theory, he says it's not exactly what he's talking about. That Reb Shimon is really interested in something, or pointing something between conduct rules and status rules. And that offers, I think, a much more accurate and satisfying explanation of what Reb Shimon's up to. So Shai shows that while it's true that Reb Shimon values Sparah more highly than his contemporaries, and it's also true that in contrast to his teachers, he wants to minimize the gap between human intellect and the divine / halachic intellect, the kind of natural law, positive law distinction is not what he's up to. Now, I take it as my brief here also to quibble a bit, so quibble I will. And the truth is, I'm going to darshan the cover. So the title of the book is called Chashiva Mishpatit B'Yeshivot Lika, translated as Legal Thinking in Lithuanian Yeshiva. Taken that way, this is a book about Lithuanian Yeshiva. The artwork, it tells us that this is a picture of Shem Shkop and a sort of stylized rendition of the text of the Shara Yoshev, his magnum opus. The subtitle tells us that this is Iyunim B'Mishnato Shel Rav Shimon Shkop, translated as The Heritage and Works of Reb Shimon. So which is this? Is this about Reb Shimon Shkop, or is this about the Lithuanian Yeshiva? If you open the book itself, the same sort of tension exists. There are chapters that are sort of biographies of Reb Shimon. There are chapters that are about the Lithuanian Yeshiva more generally. Now, obviously, we have here a kind of genus species thing. Right? Reb Shimon is a member of the Lithuanian Yeshiva, but I think there are important differences, and not just in exactly the type of issues the book tackles. Now, of course, anyone writing in law has a legal theory, but typically doctrinal writers have legal theories implicitly and don't see it as part of their brief as sort of telling you legal theory. It's the outsider who will say, this is a legal theory they must be operating. In that sense, I'm convinced that the scholars of the Yeshiva Aknita had a legal theory. I even wrote an article about it, so with that I agree. But I do not think that they saw themselves as legal theorists, or that they saw the giving over the development of the theory as part of their work. Now here, precisely because I think Shai is right about Reb Shimon Shkop, he's really different than his contemporaries. Though he clearly emerges from the same milieu and uses many of the same terms and techniques, he's always skirting the border between trying to explain the doctrine and trying to give a theoretical explanation of the doctrine. It's pretty clear that Reb Shimon in his own way, is trying to give a theoretical account of the law in ways that are closer to contemporary theorists, and therefore I think further away from his co-bristers. And therefore, I wonder whether Shai is not extending some of the things that are true about Reb Shimon onto a broader canvas than David Long. If we compare Reb Shimon's work to that of his teachers and contemporaries, the Graf, Chaim Soloveitchik, the Gris, his son, the Ber Chashmuel, Reb Elchanan Wasserman, I'm going to say that Reb Shimon is the only one to have written a book. And you say, wait a minute, I've held Chidushei Agrach in my hands, I've held the Chidushei Gris in my hands, these are books. Yes, they are books, but they're really collections of essays, each one on a specific sugya, and there's no theme running through them. Reb Shimon Shkop writes a true book. The Shari Yosher is 9 essays, each one which starts with a thesis and then prosecutes that thesis around a whole range of sugyot so that the concepts meld together. The other way, you can take all of Reb Chaim's cheftzes and gavras, they don't add up to anything. Each one is localized in its place. And that's why I would say the Chidushei Agrach al Rambam is not a book in the way we mean it. It is a collection of explanations of different segments on the Rambam. The Shari Yosher is not that way. And I think that this is, and I think Reb Shimon is unique amongst his coterie. His students already did this. Reb Moshe Bigdar Amiel comes from Reb Shimon and therefore can really start writing a conceptual, theoretical account of halakha. So I think that this is quite different, and to some degree, Shai convinced me so much that this is what Reb Shimon is doing, and that therefore I was less sure that that's what everyone else is doing. So to conclude, I would say it's clear to me that the Yeshivot Elita engaged in Lamdanut Hilchatit. I'm less certain that other than Reb Shimon and maybe some other Telzers, they were engaged in Chashiva Mishpatit, as Shai defines it. In that sense, my own preference favors the artwork.